Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for July 2nd of 2024. For today we have an enhanced risk for portions of the Midwest into the Central Plains and some of the Mississippi River valleys. For southern Iowa, northern Missouri, southeastern Nebraska, and northeastern Kansas, with a slight risk that extends across the majority of Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, southeastern Colorado, and potentially portions of northern Texas there. And this enhanced risk is going to be the thing that we're going to cover in today's forecast. This does have a 5% tornado risk on this, so we could see the potential for a couple of tornadoes for today. However, that isn't going to be the primary risk, but also still a huge risk that's going to be a part of our risk for severe thunderstorms today, even if it isn't the primary risk, and is definitely something to watch out for. And we could see the potential for a brief tornado or two extend all the way back into Colorado. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 30% damaging wind risk for the enhanced risk region, and this is going to be the primary driving factor for this enhanced risk region, where we could see some widespread damaging wind gusts, some severe wind gusts that aren't necessarily going to be significant, greater than 70 miles per hour, but definitely a bigger risk for today. But also that tornado risk is also something to watch out for on top of the damaging wind risk. And then as far as our hail risk goes, we do have a dual 15%, one for the enhanced risk region where we could see the potential for some scattered large hail, as well as a 15% for southeastern Colorado and southwestern Kansas, where we could see the potential for some scattered large hail. And then for our day 2 outlook, we do have a dual slight risk, one across the Ohio River Valley into portions of the Mississippi River Valley, for southwestern Ohio into central Ohio, northern Kentucky, southern Indiana, southern Illinois, and southern Missouri, with a slight risk for the central plains and the high plains for eastern Colorado, central into northwestern Kansas, western and central Nebraska, southwestern South Dakota, and eastern Wyoming there. Risks for tomorrow do include a 5% tornado risk for the high plains for eastern Nebraska, northwestern Kansas, and northeastern Colorado, a 15% damaging wind risk for both slight risk locations, and the possibility for some significant damaging wind gusts reaching greater than 70 miles per hour for the Hatch region there in southwestern Nebraska and northwestern Kansas, as well as eastern Colorado. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 15% with the possibility of some significant hail reaching greater than 2 inches in diameter for the slight risk region further off to the west. And then for day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for portions of the Mississippi River Valley, for Missouri and eastern Kansas and northeastern Oklahoma, where we could see some upcoming scattered severe thunderstorms. Then for our day 4, day 8 outlook, we currently don't have anything issued. Taking a look at our 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook, as of right now, Hurricane Beryl is currently barreling through the Caribbean here, just to the south of the Dominican Republic. This is currently, on record, the earliest Category 5 hurricane in recorded history, which is absolutely insane, and not to mention that this is not only the first hurricane of the 2024 tropical season, and it's already a Category 5. So it kind of worries me on what may come in the future for the peak season for tropical season if this is only in July and June. So again, Hurricane Beryl is currently a Category 5 hurricane. This isn't expected to maintain strength as it moves closer into the Gulf of Mexico and potentially even posing hazards to coastal portions of the U.S. It isn't going to maintain Category 5 strength, not hopefully, but thankfully it will not maintain Category 5 strength as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico there. If we actually click on Beryl here, we can see its path and all of its stuff here. So as of right now, this is its wind field. This is where it currently is to the south of the Dominican Republic. It is expected to continue and maintain major hurricane status as it moves into Jamaica, and as it moves into Jamaica, it is going to have a hard time. It is going to encounter more shear, and Jamaica's going to prevent it from continuously strengthening. So it is going to die down and go back down to a Category 2 hurricane, and then continue as a Category 2 into the Yucatan Peninsula, and then that's going to weaken it even more as it moves into the Gulf as a tropical storm. There has been some models that have predicted this to potentially strengthen back into a Category 1 as it moves back into the Gulf of Mexico. However, the National Hurricane Center has been saying tropical storm, and this system has been taking a little bit more of a northward trend with a lot of the most recent model runs closer into southern Texas, into the Corpus Christi region. However, it is entirely possible that Hurricane Beryl, but will be Tropical Storm Beryl by the time it moves closer to the U.S., could take a path that looks like this. It could take a path that looks like this. We don't know yet. This is still far out, and this is the projected cone of uncertainty. So it could potentially pose hazards to southern Texas there, and maybe lead to some higher coastal winds and the potential for some flooding. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today we have a slight risk for portions of the Midwest into portions of the Central Plains, for Iowa, northern half of Missouri, portions of northern and western Illinois, southern Wisconsin, as well as eastern Nebraska and eastern Kansas, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. And we do have two other marginal risks, one for the southeast here for southern Georgia, southern South Carolina, southern Alabama, northern and central Florida, including the Florida Peninsula there, as well as a marginal risk for the southwest for New Mexico and Arizona, where we could see the potential for some isolated flash flooding for today. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for portions of the Mississippi River valleys and the Ohio River valleys into the Central Plains, for eastern Kansas, Missouri, southern Illinois, and southern Indiana, where we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. Then for day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for portions of the Midwest and the northern Central Plains, for southeastern North Dakota and northeastern South Dakota, as well as central into southern Minnesota there, as well as a large marginal risk extending across a large portion of the Mississippi River valleys in the Midwest, as well as extending across Ohio River valleys into portions of the New England corridor and the Mid-Atlantic. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to support our risk for severe thunderstorms. Starting off with our surface observations, we are expected to see a cold front that is expected to push south across this region, and that is going to trigger our severe thunderstorms. We are also expected to see a warm front that doesn't really look like it is going to trigger any storms along that warm front. However, it is going to pull a surface low with it further off to the north as that warm front progresses northeastward, and that surface low will progress with it as the warm front pulls it along. Again, that cold front will trigger our severe thunderstorms for today, and as far as our 500 millibars go, we will see some pretty strong 500 millibar flow to support that risk for severe thunderstorms. We will see a little bit of a short wave that is going to be backing our storms with some pretty strong 500 millibar flow that is going to be backing our storms as well. It isn't going to be directly feeding into the region of concern. However, we will see a nudge on our cold front a little bit and support even greater forcing along that cold front, and will aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms overall and supply greater shear to this region. However, we are expected to see some pretty strong 500 millibar flow that is expected to exist across this region, with 500 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 50 knots to 45 knots across this region to support our risk for severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our low-level jet and our 700 millibar winds and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see a pretty decently strong low-level jet across this region that's going to be more than sufficient in supporting the risk for severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, with 700 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 40 to potentially an isolated 50 knots across this region. That is definitely going to be more than sufficient in supporting quite a lot of directional shear across this region. However, when you line it up with our 500 millibar flow, it is taking basically the exact same path. So we are expected to see more elongated photographs than we are expected to see curved photographs, because our low-level jet is going to be following the same trajectory as our 500 millibars. And that is leading to overall less storm relative felicity and overall less of a tornado potential across this region than what was indicated yesterday. We won't see a whole lot of storm relative helicity values like we saw yesterday with a decently strong low-level jet, because our 700 millibars and our 500 millibars are going to be following basically the same trajectory, supporting more elongated photographs than more curved photographs. And that also translates down to our 500 millibars as well, taking that same path, but you can definitely tell it is a little bit different, taking more of a northward trajectory, more northeastward compared to our 700 millibars, with some pretty decent 850 millibar flow that is expected to reach upwards of 35 knots, potentially an isolated 40 knots in some regions. And again, that will be more than sufficient in supporting quite a lot of directional shear and fueling the potential for tornadoes across this region. However, our storm relative helicity values may be more modest. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and our extreme upper level winds and how that's going to support the risk for hail, as well as support our risk for severe thunderstorms overall. You can see our upper level trough here pretty clearly, with a deep neutral trough across the high plains there in Montana that is expected to move eastward. However, it doesn't really look like we'll see a whole lot of 200 millibar flow exist across this region, with our risk for severe thunderstorms being just a little bit to the south of our main 200 millibar flow. We could see a little bit of the strong upper level winds feed into this region. However, it looks like it's probably just going to nudge right along the back into that cold front, may not even really feed that much into this region. So that will likely lead to some much more modest bulk shear values and much lower risk for hail across this region, as we won't have as great a bulk shear across this region. We won't see as long elongated photographs, and we will see overall a more modest risk for hail. But hail is definitely still possible with our 500 millibar flow that is going to be elongated photographs, and with our 700 millibars and our 500 millibars. Man, I cannot put my words into or my thoughts into words for some reason today. That's been happening to me recently, so please just bear with me. I've been having a hard time putting my thoughts into words. So with our 700 millibars and our 500 millibars that are going to be taking pretty much the same path, we won't see as curved photographs, and we'll probably see some elongated photographs that will likely lead to overall much more greater risk for hail across this region. However, with the lack of 200 millibar flow, that will definitely be limiting our hail risk quite substantially, and because we don't have basically any 200 millibar flow feeding into this region associated with our trough, we won't really be able to look for defluence if there is no 200 millibar flow across this region to begin with. Taking a look at our storm relative helicity and how that's going to affect the risk for tornadoes across this region. Storm relative helicity actually looks like it has had a little bit more of an uptrend recently, with storm relative helicity values that are expected to stay much more modest for the majority of this risk as storms track through the middle of the enhanced risk region. And then by the time we reach golden hour and the sun sets and we see more of a temperature gradient and stronger low-level jet as a result, we will see some stronger storm relative helicity values across this region. Storm relative helicity values that are going to be reaching upwards of 200 even 300 by golden hour as storms exit the enhanced risk region and begin exiting the 5% tornado risk. However, the enhanced storm relative helicity values and more modest most unstable Cape values as storms exit the enhanced risk region will overlap quite nicely to support a pretty decent risk for tornadoes across this region, even before our low-level jet strengthens as a result of the increased temperature gradient from the sun setting. We will see more modest storm relative helicity values, as I did say earlier, with storm relative helicity values that are going to be reaching 100 meters squared a second squared to potentially 200 meters squared a second squared in maybe the mid 200s across this region, which is definitely more on the modest side of things. However, could definitely support a risk for tornadoes across this region, especially with some pretty decent Cape values across this region. So again, tornadoes are still on the table. We could see a couple of tornadoes for today. However, I doubt that it will be upgraded as far as our risk for tornadoes. This should stay around a 5% tornado risk. Again, everything is definitely in place for our risk for tornadoes, but we have yet to look at our most stable cape and our surface-based cape. Taking a look at our bulk shear values and how that's going to indicate the potential for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent bulk shear values that are going to be at least backing our cold front, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 40 to 60 knots across this region. So some pretty decent bulk shear values. And for the first half of our risk for severe thunderstorms, it does look like we will also have some pretty decent bulk shear values ahead of our storms as well, with bulk shear values that are going to be getting upwards of 50 knots in the warm sector there. And let's just pull a sounding, see what it looks like. Yeah, not a whole lot of stormlets of Felicity. In fact, we have a little bit of veer back as well. We do have some curvature in the upper levels, in the mid levels there, but a decently elongated photograph, at least in our 500 millibars, definitely not in our 200 millibars, so we are lacking some shear there. In fact, it does look like we even have veer back, so that will be subtracting a lot of our shear across this region. And just looking at this area here, this shows our shear relative to the storm itself. So when the parcel begins to rise, it does have a good amount of shear for a little bit, and then it just veers back and basically takes it all away. So we have a very, very poorly sheared environment. We'll definitely see the potential for hail nonetheless, which will come out of our 500 millibars and below our 300 millibars, as well as potentially some aid from our 700 millibars as well. However, this is just not the best for hail, and honestly not really the best for tornadoes either. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity and what our models are indicating. So starting off with our ARRR, which I'll use as a baseline to compare our different models to, it does look like we are expected to see a very nice and organized line that is going to progress through Iowa, with some development that is going to develop across the second half of the enhanced risk region into Kansas later on along that cold front. That's still going to be semi-discrete to probably linear. However, we will definitely see a pretty nicely organized linear mode further off to the north there, as what is kind of expected for a risk for severe thunderstorms for today, as our 500 millibar flow is basically completely parallel to our cold front, meaning that the precipitation is going to be vented off to the north on top of another storm, and that's kind of just going to turn into a big line pushed along by our cold front. So we will definitely see much more of a linear system, which will kind of be a little bit more limiting to our potential for tornadoes, because we like to see a little bit more of an isolated risk for tornadoes, or an isolated setup for tornadoes than more linear storms. But again, some embedded tornadoes are definitely still possible, but this will definitely be a little bit more of a linear system, with a risk for damaging wind gusts being more favored by linear systems. Our HRW NSSL does agree with that linear system mode. HRW ARW still linear. HRW FE3, actually this is kind of surprising. It actually kind of indicates it's starting off as a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode, with some storms developing south along the cold front that rapidly organizes into a linear mode, but it is indicating it's starting off as a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode. NAM Nest is also indicating that linear system, actually a little bit further down to the south than our ARRR. ARRR 6 hour, it I don't think it even goes far enough out. Nope, it does. And that also indicates a little bit more of a linear mode, but storms aren't as widespread or robust as our ARRR, or regular ARRR, and in fact actually indicate it's starting off as a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode, and kind of staying that way as it's a little bit more messy. HRW NSSL 12-hour linear system, HRW ARW 12-hour linear system, HRW FE3 12-hour, kind of an odd semi-discrete mode there, that actually is a little bit more of an isolated mode, which is actually kind of interesting, that our HRW and FE3 and our HRW FE3 12-hour favors more of a linear or more of a discrete system. But our NamNest 12-hour also says that linear system, which is in line with our regular NamNest. So I think it's definitely safe to say that we will see a linear system with our storms, as supported by the geometry of our trough compared to our triggering boundary. So even if our HRW FE3 models do indicate somewhat of a more semi-discrete mode, it likely will not happen. This will likely be more of a linear system, favoring more of a risk for damaging wind gusts, with the possibility of some embedded hail and some embedded tornadoes. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see some pretty hot temperatures as the cold front moves through this region. Ahead of the cold front in the warm sector, we are expected to see temperatures that are expected to reach upwards of 90 degrees and potentially even the mid-90s in some regions. That is definitely going to be quite hot across this region and support quite a lot of instability as storms track through the middle of the enhanced risk region. As the sun begins to set and storms move into the southern enhanced risk region, and we see more of a temperature gradient and an increased low-level jet, it does look like our temperatures are expected to decrease to the 80s in the mid 80s, 80 degrees to 85 degrees ahead of our cold front, which will still support some pretty decent instability values. However, we will look at our surface-based cape coupled together with our convective inhibition to see if storms will really be able to support that much of a tornado risk as the cold front pushes into the southern enhanced risk region and the southern half of the 5% tornado risk. Sorry that I can't put my words or my thoughts into words. I don't know what's going on. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see a lot of moisture in the warm sector ahead of our cold front. Dew points that are expected to reach at least 70 degrees and potentially even 75 degrees in this region. So we are expected to see tropical-like dew points across this region, and on top of some pretty hot temperatures that will support a lot of instability across this region and will be more than sufficient in fueling our risk for severe thunderstorms. However, greater dew point values will mean greater moisture in the atmosphere and likely more heavier rainfall and the potential for some flooding in some regions. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, it does look like we are expected to see not a whole lot of cloud cover across this region, with again our mid-level clouds and our low-level clouds being more of those contenders to limit surface heating if they are in place across a warm sector. We may see a little bit of some mid-level clouds and some low-level clouds to start off. However, it does look like it is expected to clear out pretty quickly over the next couple of hours. And it doesn't really look like it's going to pose too much of a hazard. It does look like we are expected to remain pretty clear as far as cloud cover across the majority of the warm sector for the majority of the day ahead of that cold front. So that will allow for some pretty decent surface heating and quite a lot of instability as a result, enhancing that risk for severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our lapse rates across this region and how that's going to affect our instability and our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, as well as our hail risk, we are expected to see some modest lapse rate values across this region. So even if we have some not so thick cloud cover across this region and we are expected to see some great surface heating, we won't really have the best lapse rates, it seems. So it does look like the surface may not be able to really incorporate that into our lapse rates that much. It may be having a little bit of a hard time doing that. However, we are expected to see at least some modest lapse rates across this region, which will be great for instability, but definitely a little bit more so on the weaker end. However, these weaker lapse rates will be a little bit more limiting to our hail risk, as we don't really have the best 200 millibar flow across this region. So weaker lapse rates is going to allow for that layer for hail development to be closer down to the ground than if we had no lapse rates, so that is good for hail at least. However, it isn't going to really be too big of a difference because these lapse rates are definitely more on the modest end of things. So it's definitely going to lead to overall a lesser risk for hail across this region, as a strong updraft will have to work harder to keep those hail particles aloft for longer in that layer for hail development. So these more modest lapse rates will lead to a more modest risk for hail across this region, but will aid in our instability at least a little bit. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms overall, we are expected to see quite a lot of cape across this region, with cape values that are expected to reach upwards of 3,000 across the warm sector ahead of the cold front, which will be more than sufficient in fueling our risk for severe thunderstorms as well as our various hazards, including the risk for tornadoes, the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts, as well as the potential for some scattered large hail. Again, with regards of everything that we've looked at so far, especially for our hail risk. And as storms move into the southern half of the enhanced risk region, we will see much more modest cape values across this region, with cape values that are expected to reach upwards of 1,000 to the mid 1,000s of most unstable cape. So that is a good idea of where our surface cape may be at, because our surface cape cannot go above our most unstable cape. So we will be limited to 1,000 joules per kilogram to 1,500 joules per kilogram across this region, which is definitely more so on the weaker side, still sufficient in fueling a potential for tornadoes. However, storms do look like they are beginning to die off on these frames as storms do exit the enhanced risk region, likely indicating the presence of a cap across this region. So it will be pretty hard for any greater tornado risk to accumulate as storms exit the enhanced risk region. So I doubt that storms will really see an increased risk for tornadoes by the time the sun does begin to set, because we will see more modest instability, still sufficient in fueling the potential for tornadoes. However, we will also likely see convective inhibition in place as well, which we will look at our surface-based cape. Taking a look at our surface-based cape as well as our convective inhibition and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today, primarily our risk for tornadoes, and how that may affect our risk for surface-based storms across this region. So what we're looking at is our surface-based cape, of course, as well as our convective inhibition, which is in our dotted lines as a weak area of convective inhibition, meaning that a little bit of convective inhibition is present across this region. And whenever you see the X's there, like right here, and across this environment here, very widespread, means that the environment is completely capped and storms will basically not fire out at all. And if storms are present with that, then they will likely be weakening. So our cap is going to be in place for the majority of the day. However, it is expected to erode away, and that presence of a cap beforehand will likely lead to a buildup of instability, at least at the surface, and lead to overall more explosive storms by the time that cap does erode. So that is one thing to look out for. However, it does look like the majority of our surface-based cape, or the majority of our most unstable cape, is expected to translate down to our surface-based cape, and we will see surface-based storms across this region without a doubt, and the potential for tornadoes as well. And we are expected to see this environment begin to get capped out as storms move into the second half of the enhanced risk region and exit the enhanced risk region. You can see along that cold front there, we still see a warm sector with some decent most unstable cape values, reaching at least 1,000 joules per kilogram and 1,500 joules per kilogram of surface-based cape, the same that we saw on our most unstable cape. However, along our cold front, it does begin to get strongly capped. So any storms still on our cold front will begin to weaken and will likely not be able to develop a whole lot of rotation, and will significantly limit our tornado potential as storms move into the second half of that enhanced risk region. So again, with that greater shear, as our sun begins to set, and we see that greater temperature gradient, and in turn a greater low-level jet, and that won't really affect our tornado risk too much, because our convective inhibition will simply just not allow for a greater tornado risk. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in fueling our severe thunderstorms, it does look like we are expected to see some decently strong 0 to 3 kilometer values across this region, especially when storms do begin to develop along I'm not sure what river that is that runs through the Omaha metro region. However, as storms do develop along the the Nebraska Iowa border there, we will see a large pool of some pretty strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability values along that cold front, which will be a huge kickstart for those storms along that cold front, and massively aid in very, very quick, very large growth of those storms when they do begin to develop. And we will see a quite a lot of decent, most unstable cape values ahead of our storms as they continue to progress through the enhanced risk region, with 0 to 3 kilometer cape values that are expected to get upwards of 140, 150, 130 across this region, which will definitely be a large aid in fueling our risk for severe thunderstorms, including the potential for tornadoes. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that's going to indicate the potential for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent energy helicity index values across this region that are actually going to be indicating overall a greater risk for tornadoes than just a 5% tornado risk. However, when we look at our soundings here, you'll see why that is. The greater energy helicity index values are likely as a result of some greater most unstable cape values, some greater surface-based cape values. However, when you look at the photograph, it kind of gets a little wonky. But these are some pretty decently strong 0 to 3 kilometer energy helicity index values across this region, with energy helicity index values that are expected to get upwards of 3 across this region, 2, 3 along the cold front, definitely indicating the overlap of our ingredients for tornadoes and the potential for tornadoes as well. However, if we click anywhere, if we just get one simulated sounding, look at that photograph. I don't think there's really much to say about this. It's poorly sheared in the upper levels of our photograph, which is actually kind of surprising because it did look like we had some decent 500 millibar flow. However, when we have a lack of a strong 200 millibar flow, you can see that the majority of our upper level shear, our speed shear, is a result of those mid levels. And we don't really have the best curvature in the low levels of our photograph either. It is fairly straight. We do have some noticeable curvature. It does have a sort of a cyclical hook. However, it does look like the majority of our storm relative velocity values may be coming out of our mid levels here. Well, storm relative velocity values do not pick up anything above 700 millibars, which is at 3 kilometers. But as far as our 500 millibars go, that seems to be where we have the most curvature. So definitely a pretty wonky photograph, and we will see some significantly more modest storm relative velocity values as a result, and will likely be limiting to a tornado risk. And we do have quite a lot of cape values across this region, so we will definitely see the potential for tornadoes without a doubt, as we will see some pretty strong updrafts across this region. However, amongst some weaker shear, we will likely see a balance between the two of weak shear, strong cape, and that will likely fall somewhere within that 5% tornado risk across this region. But we could definitely see the potential for a couple of tornadoes along that cold front. Taking a look at our deep cape and how that's going to indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region, we are expected to see a ton of D cape across this region, with D cape values that are expected to get upwards of 1,100 joules per kilogram, 1,200 joules per kilogram of D cape across this region. So we will see a lot of D cape ahead of our storms. However, it may be hard for it to extend into the majority of the enhanced risk region. It does look like it may be limited to that southern half of the enhanced risk region and the slight risk region. So we may not see a whole lot of DK values across this region, but further down to the south, we definitely do. And if the warm sector, if our strong surface flow in the warm sector can pull some of that D cape up north, that will definitely lead to some pretty widespread damaging wind gusts across this region. Doesn't really look like they're going to be necessarily too significantly strong, as we may have some more limiting D cape values across this region, with them being further down to the south and ahead of our cold front, but not really right along our cold front, where storms will be able to where they'll be readily available to be used by our storms, and could potentially be more limiting. So still definitely going to see some pretty decent DK values across this region, coupled together with how widespread our storms are expected to be. These DK values will definitely aid in the damaging wind risk regardless. Taking a look at our mesoanalysis page and our various hail risks, we do have a 12 starting off with our large hail parameter. We do have a 12 there. However, keep in mind that we are a couple hours from peak storm time. These hail parameters that we're about to look at likely won't be up to par with what will probably be happening by the time storms are actually going at their full strength. So we do have a 12 there, at least indicating the overlap of some of our hail ingredients. Same with our significant hail parameter, where we do have a 1.5, even though we aren't really expected to see much of a risk for significant hail today. For our stars hail size, we do have upwards of 2 to 1.75 across this region. So again, indicating at least the overlap for ingredients for hail, and indicating at least by minimum the risk for hail across this region. Then for our stars significant hail percentage, we do have upwards of 100% in that small area there. With a couple areas that are getting upwards of 90 and 80, 70. So a lot of the models are indicating at least the overlap for a lot of our ingredients for hail, and the potential for hail later on. And these values for our different hail parameters will likely increase as our storms continue to strengthen and move through the enhanced risk region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator, and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast, or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.